This is the second and last class in J. Levin's short course in What Women Need to Know About Men. Jay begins by describing the attributes of the, quote, perfect woman, unquote, in the minds of those men who see and relate to women in a reactive manner.
So hello, welcome back. This is class 2 about what women need to know about men, for women only. In the first class, we looked at the traumatized patterns of men, somewhat at the traumatized patterns of women, and the historical relationship behind those patterns. And we got some feedback from the women in the class about their own experiences with those patterns, which seem to be somewhat ubiquitous for those who are not in healthy relationships already. And if you are in a healthy relationship or one that's working perfectly, you're not watching this tape probably at this point. So in this class, I want to introduce you to a deeper sense of where the men are coming from and where the women might be coming from. And then we want to look at ways that you may change your own attitudes about the situation, hold space that allow the men to show up in more the way you might like, develop skills that in fact will help you have the men meet you in the place you might like, so that you don't get the sense that you're trapped in an endless system that's not going to bring you the kind of relationship you want. So let's take a look at and talk about each of the attributes on that list, describing, quote, unquote, perfect woman for the traumatized man. This is taking a look at the ideal woman from the point of view of the male who is very much in some major elements of his king self. And it's also a list of experiential highlights that you'll probably be able to recognize in your own life. So let's take a look at and talk about each of the attributes on that list. From that space of that male who's got little experience and skills in easy relatingness with the complexities of another human being, and with a woman who's got her own sense of reality and who's probably entered relationship through the sexual romantic pathway rather than from a deeply grounded friendship pathway. So basically, you're strangers to each other when you meet. What's really going on in the sense of a male's expectation? So for one thing, the woman creates a space where she's available sexually, and at the same time, she's making it safe for him to feel, whoever he is, that he's okay just as he is. She's not demanding or needy. She affirms him continuously as valued. She's patient with him. She shares his attitudes and beliefs so that there's not a lot of conflict around where you're coming from. Doesn't feel challenged to look at any of his beliefs. She's willing to initiate if he doesn't, including sexuality, anything that regarding communications, not the kind of communications that drills down to deep emotional issues, but initiates activities, ventures, if he doesn't do it. So not only she stays sexually available, but basically she's got the sense that she's sexually still turned on to him. She's a great empathic listener, so that when he's doing his stuff about his life and what his needs are and things coming up for him, she's there being his supporter and that listener. She enjoys his jokes, so he feels good about being able to make her laugh, and occasionally she makes him laugh. She gives him permission to feel. She creates a space where he says he can feel a little bit, and it's okay if you feel that. I'm not going to judge you for that. It's safe for you to feel that. And if he chooses to adore her, she lets him do so, and it's okay if he doesn't. In other words, if he's not showing her adoration, she's okay with it. You know, he's allowed to express that element of himself if it comes up, and she doesn't make him feel unsafe about it. Maybe she loves it. And of course, she avoids blame. She doesn't go into, you the perfect woman, does not go into blaming this creature. You don't find fault with him, blame him for things. So in that model of behavior, the reality is you're creating a space in which he feels very, very, very safe. You're there for him. He doesn't have to show up too much for you. You make him feel affirmed. You create activity if he doesn't, and you create an overall pleasant, safe space for him, no matter what you're getting back from him. And when his inner drama is going on, you make him feel soothed. So some of you may have provided this and found that to some degree the fellows got worse. He started taking advantages, taking things for granted, giving the sense, well, this is really all about me and not a lot about you, and thanks for showing up for something that's all about me. And you felt left alone, abandoned, not attended to, and again, this is on a sliding scale. So before we go to the next step with this, what I'd like you to do is get out your notebook, look at each of these issues, and rate them on a scale of 1 to 10 of how much you've gone along with this game, where you've done this because you felt it was necessary and played that game out because you felt this is how I have to be in relationships, so I got to show up this way and sort of deny my own needs and my own requests, but I'll really show up even if I have to make an effort to show up here. So look at the list and see if you've played out any of these roles consciously and deliberately, thinking I have to do this. And you might want to make a separate mark next to those things you've managed to escape, where you haven't gone into that game with the person, or where this has been not you trying and striving, but it felt natural to be in this role.
To assist listeners now, I am going to repeat the list of attributes Jay just discussed that many men want in the quote-unquote perfect woman. You may want to pause this as you write down each attribute and consider whether you have drawn men into your life by trying to live up to these attributes, and also think about how you have responded. Did it affect your sense of self? What reactions and behaviors did it bring out in you? Makes it safe, but stays sexual. Not demanding or needy. Affirms him continuously as valued. Patient. Shares his attitudes and beliefs. Initiates if he doesn't. Sexually turned on by him. Great empathetic listener. Enjoys his jokes and occasionally makes him laugh. Gives him permission to feel. Lets him adore her if he chooses to. Is okay if he doesn't. Doesn't blame him. We return now to Jay's class.
To be even a little more clear, as you're looking at this, if you have more than one relationship, as many of you will have had, just look at what your tendencies have been to play out these kind of roles. Okay, so what patterns anyone willing to share that they identified?
I think the most common one when I look down the list is not being demanding or needy. So kind of keeping more of a sort of aloof distance. I mean, there's definitely been plenty of relationships where I've been really conscious about not calling, not emailing, giving a lot of space. And even if I wanted to maybe make a communication, I would just deliberately not, just to give more space.
Is that just at the beginning when you're in the early dating stage, or is that after you're lovers and you're in a relationship and you still maintain that pattern?
I think more like probably 3/4. I mean, I think I do it more often still, even in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think it's also partly my nature.
Mm-hmm.
So
your nature is not to pay attention to your own needs and requests.
I mean, not to be that I don't feel really needy, because I feel like, whereas some people might feel like the man is completing them or providing something that they don't have. So I feel as I've gotten older, I definitely don't feel as many needs that need to come from the outside. So if they're busy, I'm fine with that. You know, I'm not I'm not needing so much attention as I did maybe when I was in my 20s or something like that, where I needed someone around. I actually don't want someone around all the time.
So to drill one level down, assuming your needs were being met in the last relationships, you would likely still be in that relationship?
Oh. Right. Yes. So no. Yeah.
So when you're in relationships and you had real needs, because we all have real needs, do you feel you had the freedom to say to your partner, I have a real need for this and that? It's not neediness, but I have a need for this and this to make the relationship feel richer and wholer and more satisfying to me. And would you be willing to make an agreement about how we can work on that?
I definitely was able to express that with my last partner, and he was in a place where he could provide that, and we just mutually went our separate ways.
Would that discourage you from expressing that again in future relationships because the
No.
partner wasn't there?
No.
So, okay, so you're healthy enough to be able to say, these are my needs, and I'd like you to be open to a partnership around my needs as well as yours.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
For me, it's easier just to put it down and walk away. That's probably my issue, is more it's easier to walk away.
Okay, so there is an avoidance There's still some avoidance, right? There's an avoidance pattern here. Okay, sure. Very common with women for them to say, okay, I tried that once, I better leave it alone. It's not going to get me anywhere. I can see it's not going to get me anywhere.
Yeah, like time and energy. I don't have the time or energy
Okay,
to
cool.
wait.
Jay now discusses the difference between a healthy response to reactive male patterns instead of trying to be something you were not.
So now we're going to take a look at the real woman and the traumatized man versus the perfect woman and the traumatized man. And the real woman has real feelings, a real vision of what her life should be, a real basic need to be appreciated and honored, a real basic need for healthy communications with her partner, and a real fundamental basic need to be neither caretaker nor mother nor servant, but be a real equal in a relationship, meeting a man who's stepping up and meeting her where she wants to come from. So as a preliminary discussion, I want to focus on the pattern of the wounded woman, with a reminder that we all come into relationships from a traumatized place. We all bring a traumatized sensibility into relationships. We all bring our defensiveness, our fears, the patterns of fight or flight we've developed in childhood, seeking approval, trying to fix, whatever that is. Men bring it, women bring it. Men tend towards to bring it in through the model of take care of me, be the king. Women tend to bring it through the model of my duty is to fix. Those things are not 100% universal, but they're the strong tendencies, the inner psychic dynamic tendencies of the woundedness. And you show up, you end up in a relationship and get into from early sexuality and romance, and then that bubble bursts, and you find yourself in the real world dealing with another person's real self. And you need tools and guides to do that. So as I said in the first class, my recommendation is to understand that you're in a position in which a relationship is an opportunity to heal your wounds, have the other person heal their wounds, and that means having a conscious awareness of what those wounds are, the patterns behind them, and different kinds of tools you need to heal those wounds. And the book I've been recommending as a good primer for this is Conscious Loving by Gay and Catherine Hendricks, which I do think is the best basic book. And there's a lot of good books out there for understanding the patterns we get into and healing those patterns. So if you've already entered relationship and find these patterns coming up and find yourself not satisfied because the romantic bubble has burst and you're dealing with the day-to-day realities of each of you trying to get your real selves expressed, and your traumatized selves or your patterns of dealing with it are either blame or ups and downs in the relationship, or you've got to change, or I got to get this guy to change, using tools like frustration and demands to bring about the change, whatever your fight or flight tools may be. You want to start developing new tools and invite your partner to share in those new tools. So that's a basic. And if you're not in a relationship yet and you're thinking you're going to get there through the romantic sexual route, well, that's the highest rate of failure there is. So I would recommend that you start cultivating the idea not to hop into bed so soon. And you're going to develop deep friendships and ask the male to work with you on developing a deep friendship, even if you're acknowledging at the same time you have sexual interest in the person. Successful relationships are not about what I can get out of it. It's what I can share in it. It's not about just me and I'm going to get fixed and I'm going to have the kind of lovingness I've wanted all my life and I'll feel finally safe and then I can be my real self. It's about learning to be your real self that exists no matter what the outside circumstances are, and learning adult skills for dealing with the challenges that come forward, to invite people into that space where you're both sharing your real selves and you're not doing this endless dance of up and down and in and out from the struggle between your idealized selves, your stance selves, your traumatized selves, as I call it, your reactive behavior patterns, and their reactive patterns broken up by moments of connection from the real self that makes it think, well, I'll stick around here more. But you keep cycling through the patterns because you don't understand the patterns and what you're going through. So I deal with this, as I've mentioned, in much more detail in the 2 relationship classes in the Life Mastery Basics course. For our purposes here, it's important to say to yourself, I'm going to be open to being a student of both the nature of relationship and how we relate to each other, and the tools and the skills of handling and healing those behavior patterns and emotional states that get in the way of us truly relating soul to soul, spirit to spirit, and doing this dance, fun dance of spirits, and enjoying our relationship. So there's a fair amount of sophisticated education that goes into that. We can't cover that all in this one tape, but I want to start dealing with some of the core elements of what it means to transit from any sense that you need to be the perfect woman to one in which you're a real woman, claiming your own power and creating the space for the man to meet you in that sense of equality. So obviously, if the man is your good friend and you've cultivated a friendship with your partner and you feel he's a good friend, you have a good grounding to begin with. If he's not a good friend and you don't feel he's basically an ally and friend, or you're entering a new relationship, then it's incumbent upon you, if you want to have a good relationship, to start saying, okay, let's see if I get an agreement with this person to be in mutual caringness with each other and really talk out and have agreements about what a relationship really is meant to be and what a support base is. Relationships that are sexually based primarily or begin sexually have a huge rate of failure because sex is just one of the chakras and sexual energy can attach to anything. Bringing all the chakras to bear, full person to bear in a relationship with your heart open begins with the idea not of what am I going to get out of it, but what can I share into it? Do I really care for this person? Does this person really care for me? So a good starting place for deciding if you're going to go forward your relationship is determining that there's a mutuality of caringness that you want to explore and that the things that are in the way are elements to be learned, that it's just simply a matter of a poor skill set, not a matter of somebody being right or wrong, because we're all wrong in the sense that we have sort of very childish or primitive reactive fight or flight skills that we bring to bear in the most complex of human circumstances, which is relationships. So let's take a closer look at some of the core elements when the real woman shows up and begins by setting an agreement that we're going to explore a deeper sense of relationship and mutual caringness as the basis for our relationship, rather than this unspoken, mysterious dance we do with each other. So what are those elements? You know, for those in the class, feel free to ask questions as we go along. I get clarification as we go along. So first one I've listed is ask for mutual safety in a manner that is not demanding or needy. So that means you actually sit down and have a conversation and talk about what scares you and what scares the man and get to know each other's fear points and ask the person to be really honest and create the space for that. You say, what would scare you? And if you sense they're not available, what about it that I might do would really scare you? And just say, I'm here to do this, to have this conversation, because I want to create a safe zone for both of us. I want you to feel safer, and I want to feel safer, and I want to tell you what's going to scare me. But our basic agreement is that we want to create a space where we can be caring for each other, not in this other kind of dance. You would ask for a mutual safety zone, and you do so in a manner that's not demanding or needy. I demand we do this. I need this to happen. You want to say, I feel a little bit sad and a little bit fearful that our relationship is not going as well, because I'd like us to be able to create the space for an easier, more free-flowing, fun kind of experience with each other. And I know that at the basis of that, that requires each of us to feel safe. So let's have a conversation about that. That's pretty self-explanatory, and a lot of women come and say, well, I can't get the guy to sit down for that. Well, if you can't get the guy to sit down for that at all, if you can't create the space of mutual caringness and agreement about that, what are you in a relationship? If you're just there to get laid, or if you're just there to feel you got somebody in the house to do this, well, you've limited your possibilities for real growth, and you're just... that part of you that feels unsatisfied, believe me, is going to act out, and he's going to know it, and you're going to know it. And the same is going to be true for him. The thing about the mutuality of relationship is it actually works for both parties, even if they don't know it. So creating a conscious, loving space, mutually caring space, as a goal and as an intention, really requires a sort of adult agreement. What do we want to do with our lives? How do we want to be with each other? Do we want to be in this game, or do we want to play in a healthier game? And if the person is so unavailable they can't meet you there, your options are leave, seek counseling, etc. We'll explore some of the options a little bit more a little bit later, where you're getting resistance to these ideas. So a second understanding would be that you give and require affirmation and evaluation, but not that you want it out of fear, but you want it to come out of a sense of truthfulness. So one of the things that happens because we're primitively organized into this matrix of judgmentality that we live in is that it's much easier for most of us to find what's wrong with something than what's right with something. It's much easier for most of us to see somebody else's flaws rather than their strengths, rather than their good, healthy qualities. Those of you who've done the Mastery Basics class certainly know what that looks like, have that experience for yourself and how nourishing it is. So a requisite for being the real woman, showing up as the real woman with the traumatized man, and helping create a co-space for the traumatized man to show up as the real man, is that one of the agreements would be for a mutuality of affirmations about each other. So you would actually look at the course of a given day to say to him, I'm going to tell you not because I want to take care of you, but I'm going to really share with you what I think your really good qualities are. And every now and then I'll just do it spontaneously, and I'm going to make a point every day to tell you this, so that it's not that your neediness and I'm taking care of you, it's that I want you to hear this. And it's extremely important for me to hear it back from you. I want to hear from you that you're switching your attention because you want to be in this relationship to what you value about me. And it's important for me to hear that because it makes me feel safe. It's part of the safety thing. It makes me feel that you really do care about me. And I don't want to think you're here just to meet my needs. I want to have a mutuality and because I need somebody. And at the same point, I don't want you to feel that I'm here just to take care of you. You know, the rule is that we spend time, we make a clear conscious effort to notice in the course of a day, I love this quality about you. You have this wonderful good quality. I love your caringness. I love when you do this. I love that. Because we need to hear and we need to be telling ourselves and affirming for ourselves so that critical mind doesn't have dominance over us, that we really have wonderful qualities that we didn't create that are natural to us. Our good qualities are natural to us. They're not ego qualities. If you're a caring person, it's not an ego quality. And you need to hear it so you're not thinking there's something wrong with me, I'm limited here. So it's somebody just saying, no, here's the truth about you. So you can receive the truth in a way that helps you grow and affirms you. So that's really important in a relationship. Okay, let's look at a third element of what the real woman is going to seek to manifest in her relationship. And you're going to want to set clear mutual treatment agreements and boundaries. And you want to do it in a loving manner, not in a, I demand this, or you're out of here, harsh way, or I'm needy, unless you give me that, I'm going to fall apart way. We're really talking about entering the most complex of human circumstances, a relationship, and doing it with an adult sensibility of what are my needs here and what kind of agreements do I want to have with my partner. One of the rules of most of our relationships and dysfunctional relationships is that most of our agreements are unspoken. They're unspoken contracts. He leaves the toothpaste out every day. I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to get in that fight. So we have an unspoken contract about not talking about the toothpaste. Or we have an unspoken contract about who's got the power over money. I'm not going to say anything. And we just sort of go along. And in the early days relationship, the unspoken contracts mean I don't even know where this other person's coming from. And what are they thinking about me, what they're feeling. There's a lack of communication skills that tend to dominate. Willingness to communicate, to be open and transparent, that tends to dominate relationships that are not working. And you get into patterns. This is from one of my classes. I'm going to work to the last moment, and then we'll get late. And then she says, we want to get to the movie theater just in time to get a decent seat. And they don't have any agreement except to disagree about this. They haven't found a way to resolve this. Just another simple example, but the agreements go to even deeper agreements about respect and lovingness. And we don't set out and say, what are the agreements we want to have about treatment with each other? So you want to make as many of those agreements mindful. You want to say to your husband or your partner or your boyfriend, in your sense of a relationship that's really would work for you, what kinds of agreements would you want to have about how we deal with situations? Getting your personal needs met. You want to take the lead. We're having this class because you're willing to be proactive, and I'm trusting that you're willing to be proactive. And if you're not, well, you go in one ear and out the other, or you bother yourself with why you didn't do it. Still, if you want to make progress, you've got to be proactive with this information. You've got to be willing to say, it doesn't matter who starts it, whether I start or he starts it, but my life and my sense of satisfaction in the way I live my life is really what's at issue here. And unless I take proactive, conscious control of this, unless I say, I'm going to make the great adventure of my life to have my life work the way I want and learn the tools to do it and speak up and hold that space and be willing to be a leader if my husband's not the leader or my boyfriend's not the leader, then I'm willing to be that leader, because otherwise you're just in drift. And I tell you from my own experience is I get 20 women for classes like this for every man I get. And we're in a state where the historical process of women's liberation has allowed them to go to a place where they think, I've been liberated from my parents' patterns to a certain degree, I've got more power in the culture than I had beforehand, so I don't know the boundaries of that. So there's this feeling that I want to go further. I want to get more of the world healed. So more women are involved in working on themselves. And they bring that capacity that we talked about in the first class of relationship and openness. So when men are trapped and finding it a harder time to get out of their king patterns, and we've got men's groups, consciousness groups working on that. Men are making progress, but we're making progress at a slower level than women because we still came from the position of we had the power in the culture. We seemingly need less to change. Of course, we need more to change. And because of biologically, we move a little slower in these areas. Most of us, not all of us by any means. So to empower yourself as the temporary matriarch in the sense that you're going to be the leader is the role women need to play, because the men's false power needs to come down to a place where they're real, and the women's real power needs to come up to a place where they're authentic, so that these two authentic souls can meet and dance with each other. So it doesn't matter who lays the ground first, it's that the ground gets laid and that you're willing to take an active role in creating the space where you're going to show up in a conscious way and inviting your partner to show up in a conscious way. And one of the rules of the universe is like energy, like meets like energy. So if you hold that space patiently, you're more likely to have that happen. So you want to be patient, therefore, about developing your spoken contracts. And you don't have to do it. You can't develop all contracts and go away for a week and 3 weeks and talk about it nonstop. But you want to comfortably set aside time for yourself in the course of a day or a week. You make agreements about time when you're going to look at all the issues that come up in a marriage or a partnership or a relationship and see what kind of natural agreements you can have. One of the basics of a good relationship is they're based in fun. So if you're just based totally in drama, try to add some fun into the whole game of it. And if you're with somebody you think you can never have fun with, don't even try this stuff. Get out of the relationship. It's not going to work for you. If you don't have sufficient mutuality of interest or enough fun in debating the differences and the differences, so that's the game, and that's fun for you. But if there's some sense that you're just there because you're there, and it's never going to be fun because you don't have any places in which you can play together, his interest, the way he plays and the way you play is so different, then you shouldn't be there in the first place. So going forward is assuming that you see real potential, and at least you want to explore the levels of potential in your relationship. So you want to be patient about developing the spoken congress, and you want to stay within your deeper knowingness. In other words, a deeper knowingness is not your reactive self. You don't want to go into, I need this, and you know when you're in your reactive self, if there's fear, anger, rage, etc. involved in trying to get something agreed to, that you're in a reactive state. If you say, let me calmly meditate, vision what I'd like to have and put it gently out there, and then be inviting. Knowing it says, this works for me. Vision your life as you'd like to see it. Vision yourself being happy and what that looks like if you really were happy, how you would be relating. And create that picture, and if you move gently with your knowingness towards that, so the energy you're bringing to your partner is not super drama, but this is going to feel good to both of us to go there.
Jay now looks at how women enable men and the need to set boundaries, as well as some other important issues.
I wrote, do not mistake enabling for patience. So what does that mean? It means If your husband's reacting out and you're sort of supporting his acting out around these issues, oh, I get it, I see, you're not there yet, or whatever it is, that's okay. Okay, I get it, I'll come back with you and we'll talk about it when you're in a better mood, or whatever that sensibility is, that enabling your less than behavior from where you really don't feel powerful and weak, that's not going to serve you. What does serve you is genuine patience, really holding the space, feeling trusting that you're going to move forward with this, having a clear vision, and moving forward with it. So let's look at what boundaries are. The most obvious boundaries are, you may not hit me. That's a boundary. When I'm asking for solitude, because I need to meditate, I'd like you to respect that as a boundary. We set up boundaries as we go along. And what we seek to do then is get agreements so that people understand, these are my boundaries. I have issues about being spoken to in a certain way. We all have different issues that trigger us. So we're saying, this is the real me. I've got a boundary about this. It may have to do with being a sense of having been violated in the past in some way, and I'm still triggered there, so I need to move cautiously here to open up. So for the moment, I have a boundary, and hopefully it'll heal. Or it may be something that's really a boundary in terms of appropriate behavior, like you do not hit me. That's a boundary. You do not physically aggress against me. It's an obvious boundary. So agreements would be, as I've said earlier, you want to take as much of your relationship and make it understandable and on the table, the elements of your relationship, day by day. You want to develop as many spoken agreements about what's going to be in every area versus unspoken agreements, because we tend to hide behind unspoken agreements. Unspoken agreements lead to projections on where the other person might be coming from. Is he thinking this? Is he going to do this? You don't even have a spoken agreement to just really share where you're coming from. It's a major spoken agreement. And then there's the ones about how do you deal with disagreement. There's spoken agreements about money issues. There can be spoken agreements about time off from each other, spoken agreements about how to be with friends, spoken agreement when you're together. You want to work it out in the sense of mutual caringness that, okay, let's see, we're going to have differences of opinion, and let's see where we can come to agreements on things, household chores, things like that, rather than be thinking, oh, he didn't do that, he didn't do that, he didn't do that. I wish, but I better not say anything because, I'll just trigger him. That's a minorly toxic relationship. If that was all that's going on, and you don't want that. You want healthy, fully caring, fully open, sharing, having fun, taking responsibility for your own trauma, your own reactiveness, not blaming the other person, making agreements to do all that. Next on the list is shares his attitudes and beliefs and has spoken contracts to allow for disagreements. So if you're in a relationship where you have tremendously different set of values, attitudes, and beliefs, you're going to have a good deal of conflict built into it, unless you enjoy the conflict. And the fun of the relationship is part of the conflict, because neither one of you take it too seriously. It's just the game of being different. And there are couples like that. The political couple, James Corville and his wife, a right-winger and a moderate liberal, not a real left-winger, but a moderate liberal. And they seem to have a lot of fun, or at least it's the public image. They seem to have a lot of fun. They've been together a long time. So there's some sense of bonding they have, of playfulness around the issues, and they're not buying into all their own stuff all the time. That's pretty rare. And mostly you're going to have more fun in life when you do have a shared interest and a lot of commonality. So before you enter relationships, look for that. Make sure you can have fun, as I've said earlier, and that there's a fair amount of commonality. And you might add where there's a commonality about growth and mutual interest in, it's okay for the other person to learn more and come back and share with me. So we got two eyes on the world rather than just one. And we enrich our experience by coming back and sharing our experiences, even if the experiences are different. So that's a healthy relationship, one of the elements of a healthy relationship. And where you have no fun in a relationship, and you're in it already, and highly divergent attitudes and beliefs, what are you doing there? And you're going to have disagreements. And working out a methodology for dealing with disagreements is important. As I think I mentioned earlier, including disagreements about, what we're going to do and how we're going to travel and things like that. So It might be one person you have to take turns in having authority over that decision. And one person surrenders and says, okay, I'm along for the ride on this one. If your person has trouble not being in control, give yourself the adventure of being along for the ride. Show me something I haven't seen. Take me on a surprise journey. A lot of us guys in particular have trouble letting go of control. And some of us guys just are so like, oh, I don't give a damn, whatever you want, you know. I like slacking around behind you, babe. So next on the list is initiates and invites initiation. What we're striving for here is creating a balance where each person feels safe to be co-creative in the relationship. And you want to talk this out. Now, some people are more obviously active and they have more ideas and let's go do this and let's go do that. My parents are like that. My father wouldn't leave the chair unless my mother got him out of it to go do something interesting. Got to go do this, Eddie. So often there's one person has more initiation than not. But in the sense of dealing with a male who's either over-initiating or over-controlling or over-escaping, over-avoiding, you want to create a groundwork where each person can feel it's safe to express my ideas, where I want to go, and invite the male into agreement, if he's a controlling person, to be open and responsive to your initiations, including sexual initiations, if you want to initiate sexuality. It's just part of the agreement. There are plenty of men who go into a sense of if she initiates, there's something wrong. They have a reaction to that, some part of their traumatized relationship of kingdom. So where in fact each person is not invited into their creativity or repressed in their creativity or overactive and controlling in their creativity, those are issues to be worked out. So in her caretaking mode, a lot of women will go into a place of, oh, well, I won't offer this or I won't offer that, and just see what he wants to do, etc. That's not healthy. So agreements are called for up front about this and the process of working things through, which we're going to come to a bit later. So the next dramatic statement is sexually available after friendship and allyship. So those of you who have already watched the relationship DVDs or heard them or participated in the relationship classes know that I go to some considerable length to lay out the trauma patterns that develop when you go into romance and early sexuality and what it triggers in us and why those kind of relationships have such a high failure rate. Because they trigger us into intimacy that we're not prepared for and we want to protect ourselves too early, especially men get to this place because they tend to come from a place, especially the romance part, before really knowing a person, come from a place of having your idealized self be seen, heard, feeling great, and then you think that's a substitute because that's what you've been craving for in life, for having healed all your wounds, and all it does is bury the wounds for a moment so you feel great, and then when the crash comes, the crash is really steep, and then you're stuck. If you don't get out of the relationship right away, you end up in the pattern of ups and downs in the relationships. It goes great one day, next day it's terrible, you have a terrible fight. So that all that up and down trauma and drama that's built into the traumatized self on each person's part. And sexuality opens the doorway to a tremendous amount of sense of intimacy in a sense of, and often on the male part, okay, I've got that handled, he'll withdraw emotionally. I'm sure every woman's had that happen. Well, most women have had that happen in their life. Many men have experienced the same thing with women, although much less so because women do tend to try to bond, explore the relationship. But in general, not that it's a golden rule, but in general and statistically borne out, it doesn't serve you to jump into sexual relationships early. It serves you to find out if you really like this person day in and day out, if you really trust this person, if this person really shows that they can be caring about you and not just there for whatever he can get out of it. So I encourage women always to take their time in the early days of meeting somebody. And if you're sexually attracted to the fellow, just say, I'm sexually attracted to you. So that shouldn't be an issue for us. Or I could see myself, I'm becoming sexually attracted to you. However, I'm not jumping into bed because I don't want to do that. I don't want to get involved on a sexual level because my goal is not sex. My goal is partnership and relationship. And if your goal is sex, well, have a great time. Go for it. Just enjoy yourself. Don't look for more. Don't expect more. If it happens, it happens to happen. But don't expect more. Expect, in fact, that each one of you is going to go into some sort of trauma more likely than not, and one or another of you is going to pull back in some way. And, you'll just have a quick fling. But if you really want to build relationship, build a relatingness with another person on all their dimensionality. Get to know the person. Find out that the person's open to working out agreements and to talking things through. And not just because he wants to get laid, because you really trust your intuition. I mean, can't tell you how many women have told me, and men too, how many women have told me that just knew this, but I went ahead anyway, and God, this is what happened. It crashed on me, it burnt on me, it got in trouble. Trust your intuition. It's really important. Women have phenomenal intuition. So do men, but there's a reason there's this expression about women's intuition. And there's a reason why so many more women are psychics than men, professional psychics than men.
Jay now takes a look at what it means to be a good listener and empathetic at the same time, and also at the importance of having fun.
So, empathic mutual listener. So what does that mean? It means you want to establish agreements about listening, about one person not overriding the other person. One of the core exercises is, if you're having this trouble, this is not easy. Everybody gets reactive. Us guys often get very reactive, especially if we feel we're being challenged. Just a request for us to change can seem to be challenging to us guys, even if it's general, because it suggests to our wounded king cells that we're not perfect, we're not doing something right. And there needs to be upfront agreements about how to deal with these things, and a willingness for a call on you to call on the man to acknowledge that he has this reactive behavior, and it's okay for him to have the reactive behavior. It's okay. He could go to that place, but it's not okay for him to let the reactive behavior mess up the relationship. He's got a responsibility to step up and allow for give and take. And you have a responsibility to make that give and take not blaming, not judgmental, but within the boundaries of serving yourself. You may remember, I've mentioned earlier, that a great book for this is Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication, Learning to be able to communicate. This is work that needs to be done in relationship. Learning to communicate, along with the book Conscious Loving. And both books offer examples of how to, if you're having this pattern, how to set aside time and work through a process of being able to talk to each other better. And listening. One process, simple talking stick. You just formalize it. The person talking holds a stick, the other person listens. You need to go that far. And before the other person gives a response of their own, they feed back what they've heard. They just say, I heard you say this, and you do it very accurately without judgment. I heard you say this, and I hear you feel I wasn't attentive that day, I was insensitive, I pulled away. You would say that back to the male, the man would say that back to you. And then give the response. And then you respond, okay, I hear you say, right? And you try to keep judgment out of the response. Or you own your judgments. My judgment on this is this, and my opinion on this is this. And you spend time hearing each other with an idea that you're going to take in the other person's point of view, and you're going to look for common ground. Some couples have so much trouble even looking at each other when they're scared, that one of the processes is that you put a chair next to you and the person's facing the other way. You're ear to ear, but you're not eye to eye. So that helps you be out of the reactive patterns you might be in. There are couples who need processes like this, and Conscious Loving has a number of them in the last third of the text. If you're beyond these, Nonviolent Communication has a number of processes describes. And it's very hard for couples who are dealing with any kind of traumatized behavior from the male part or the female part to work it through on their own without more sophisticated tools. The old blame game and trying to make, I'm going to change, I'm going to get him to change, and I'll just fix him, get him fixed, and he'll be okay, it'll work out once I get him fixed. That ain't going to work. That's not the modality. You got to get mutual commitments that you're in this together, spoken agreements about how you're going to handle issues as they come up, and you're going to need a lot of modern day tools that are not fight or flight and wedded to wishful thinking. Your fight or flight tools are not going to help you, and your wishful thinking is not going to help you. This is grown-up work. You're in college. You want to run a relationship from a learned, smart, skilled level. You got to learn those skills. You're not going to launch a nuclear rocket, as I've said a million times, without going to getting a vast amount of experience in nuclear, education. You can't launch the rocket of a great relationship. You need a different set of skills. So the reason you use these techniques is to help you open up to being an empathic mutual listener. These listening techniques, the talking and listening techniques. The reason you use these talking and listening techniques is to help you to open up to be an empathic mutual listener. And you want to be in agreement. I want to be able to sense what the other person's feeling and knowing. And so I can take in their point of view and say, okay, I get where you're coming from, and I see that you're in fear about something, and I hear you're hurt. And I'd like you to consider this, that I'm not really the object of it. This is something that else might be happening, or whatever the reality is in the moment. Or maybe you are triggering them in some deliberate, attacking way, and that you need to take responsibility for and look to change your behavior. So the next on the list is must have easy fun together, which I talked about earlier in answering the questions. And let's take some questions on this chunk and finish up.
I'm wondering how we deal with friends or partners who might be highly intuitive and they know they are, or they're psychic, and how we work with expressing to them when maybe they'll still be thinking we might be expressing, but they may feel they know better because they're psychic or intuitive, and it goes counter to what's being said or spoken, and it's not being heard or validated.
What a fabulous question. I don't think anybody's ever, in 10 years of doing this work, I don't think anybody's ever asked me that question. The simple answer is you need agreement about it. You need to come to an agreement and an empathic understanding that, us guys like to strut our stuff and show that we're the king, and I got this information and you don't have to tell me. I got it all figured out. I'm the king. I got it all figured out. And plenty of women with that have something of that king pattern as well. We tend to be more controlling in that way. So the only way to do this is to put it on the table and say, this is an issue that's in the way of the highest, most loving form of communication, the most fun we can be having. And my request to you is that you shift inside yourself to a receptive place. And I need you to know that I love you, I value you, I know you're brilliant, I know you're intuitive. And even so, it's often more helpful to me and therefore our relationship for me to be able to express what I want to express, see that I'm heard, because I just want to get it out. It's really important that I be allowed to express the me. Allow me to express, receive it, and then tell me your brilliant response. Okay, that help? Make sense?
And then what if after that exchange they're still maybe holding on to their intuition over?
There's going to be that. Nothing's going to happen like that. We don't heal our wounds like that. Or rarely do we hear our wounds like that. And part of the understanding of being in relationship, and when I talked about patience before, is allowing for the fact that the machine is going to take over, and the person needs time to have this traumatized machine, which is so powerful, it's so reactive, it's going to override. Your machine will often override your knowingness. His machine will override his knowingness, probably more than you want. And you've got to have an agreement that that's happening and an allowance that each person will take responsibility and say, so you can gently point out, your machine just took over, take another deep breath or something. It's okay. When you have these agreements, that it's not blame, that you're both in the process of working on the elements of your traumatized self, that you recognize these things as patterns that are coming from the other self. We've got two selves. We have a real self that we didn't create, that's fully knowing, beautiful, and expressive, has tremendous gifts. And we have a traumatized self from being brought up in this dysfunctional culture on this way to healing, and where we've internalized a lot of garbage and a lot of moves that we think are protecting us because we don't know who we are in our own power. And so conscious relationship, and the conscious woman is going to call the man to that consciousness and work from that place. So be sure you're doing this in the foundational way in your relationship. You're trying to build, you're not trying, you're with intention, building a firm base, step by step around this. And that's why I put so much emphasis on spoken contracts and patience and allowance. Any other questions?
My question, Jay, is what if the person has a very difficult time accepting and moving forward in something that they have. Let's say that they are completely disorganized in the paperwork department, and the whole thing is extremely bothersome to me because it is in a part of the house that we share. But they don't want to change.
So is the rest of the relationship working really great?
Most of it.
Most of the relationship's working really great. What kind of general grounding do you have in mutual listening to each other, mutual and open and spoken contracts?
It's pretty open and pretty spoken about things.
Mm-hmm. Have you made agreements about this issue that he is not honored?
No agreements yet.
No. Because?
Because part of me thinks that that's his thing and he needs to deal with it.
I see.
I'm just really bothered by it.
Have you shared your bother with him?
I've shared it in some ways.
Okay.
Not probably to the
All right.
depth of...
This is like classic repress it, enable him, unspoken contract stuff, huh? Basically, right? So if your relationship isn't foundationally already on a spoken contract, fully open, fully available for spoken contracts basis, you want to start in that place. And then using the techniques of nonviolent communication, ask him about his patterns. A lot of that patterning has to do with people who have been traumatized in childhood, and that part of their brain doesn't work very well. It's a certain kind of dyslexia. It's not just sloppiness. There's a certain kind of dyslexia involved in this patterning. And a certain sense that if I try to fix the overwhelm of the world, it'll even make me crazier. So I just leave it be. I've adjusted to it. And I focus where I need to focus, and the rest of this I don't want to have to deal with. So I don't know if you see that kind of attitude in this fellow, but it wouldn't be uncommon. So after getting into your relationship basically on a firmer ground, you'd want to create a space in which you say, listen, I would like to talk to you about something that's an important issue to me, and it's about the issues of your papers. Listen to his response. What's your own sense of this? Non-judgmental, what's your own sense of how you come to be in this place? And let him answer in a nice way. You know, you're not saying you're wrong, you're not making him wrong, you're not criticizing, you're just saying, what's your own sense of what's going on here about this stuff? And they're often good bad, you know, I can't tell you how much I care about you, I love you so much. It's whatever positive words you want to say, and to say, you know, this is not for me coming to attack you. And then listen to his response and work the nonviolent communication process. Respond to him, tell him, I hear you say this, and I see you feeling this, go to your feelings, you know, and I'm feeling this about this. And take it to the higher level, because I'd like to have us feel in a place that both of us feel safe and comfortable, and hopefully we can find some mutual ground here. And so my request for you to be open to exploring how to change this at least, because I have a need not to feel this kind of disorder around me. And for those of you who didn't start with the Life Mastery Basic Tapes, this refers to the 3 classes on nonviolent communication that you'll find therein. And one of the things you want to do as a follow-up step, as an action step, and you're asking for an action step, is find something that's simple. Maybe you might have to agree to have somebody else come in and do it. He's got to make some resources to have somebody else do it, because you don't want to be picking up behind him. Hire somebody. Or it may be you say, you find a way that he can take some baby steps towards doing this, develop that muscle a little bit and that new neural net a little bit, and feel some sense of accomplishment, and you'll be thanking him and saying, I really appreciate this, and he'll feel that, and it'll help him move towards opening to the next step. So that's standing up for yourself without enabling the guy, without hiding out from your fear of his reactive pattern, and helping create groundwork for clearing up an element in your relationship that you'd like to see flowing more. Okay. Other questions? Cool. The next thing on the list is mutual agreement and encouragement on expression of feelings.
Jay now examines the considerable matter of how we express or don't express our feelings in relationships and how important they are.
This was an example of bottled up feelings, not being completely shared, often because we feel when we bottle them up, they're going to come out nasty or rage-filled or antagonistically because they've been bottled up. And learning to be in feeling, and for the woman to invite the man and make it safe for us guys. We almost don't even know what we're feeling much of the time. And it's also true of women. We're a shut-down culture on the feeling level. Again, we deal with that quite considerably in the mastery tapes. And we pay a price for this, and we pay a price in relatingness for this. An upfront mutual agreement that it's safe for everybody to have a feeling, no matter what it is. It's okay for you to be angry, as long as you're not using the anger to attack me. As long as you say, I'm angry about this, and we look at what it's triggering in you, what you think may be triggering something that happened in your childhood, similar to that. But it goes beyond just encouragement of negative feelings. It's really expression of feelings. So a great mutual agreement is to say, let's make a day in which 10 times we say what we might be feeling at any given moment, just as a practice, so it becomes easy. And after the practice, you've built a new neural net, you've learned it's safe to do it, and so then you can integrate it and it'll just flow organically in your life. But you don't get from here to here without intermediate steps, and these are intermediate steps. It's very hard. The machine is going to run you. You've got to build block by block by block. So an agreement to share, say, I was just feeling this in the moment. I saw this, I caught this person on TV and I felt this. And you're really using feeling words. You're not saying, I felt I was being manipulated, or I felt controlled, or I'm feeling this. That's not a feeling word. I felt a little helpless when I saw that person, or I felt sad, or I felt a little anxiety when I saw that. You have in a partner the opportunity, if you use it right, to open yourself up to infinite degrees. And if you make an agreement that that's what you want to do with your partner anyway, and it's a mutual agreement, it's a shared agreement, and you call the partner into this, you make this upfront agreement, then you become playful. It's like, I'm going to enjoy learning how to say all the things I didn't say in a safe way, etc. It could include it that, there's a part of me that's angry at you, and it's just angry at you for this behavior. And I know it's because you just reminded me of my father, and he used to pull that same garbage on me. So be aware of that, and maybe you want to think about shifting your behavior. Meanwhile, I'm going to go process out my anger for a minute. But remember, in relationship, there's 4 people dealing. There's 2 people in their real selves, and there's 2 people's traumatized selves, and machine stand selves that show up. And you're in this dance with all of them. And unless you're aware and acknowledge that that's what's happening, you're only going to be in constant reactivity. Use the tools for healing the traumatized self. So the idea that someone might say, I feel both sad and anxious about the confusion around me from the mess you leave and when you don't pick up your papers, that person is less likely to feel attacked. You're just saying, I feel sad, and we want to relate on an emotional level. And to hear you relate on an emotional level is very important. Practice it a little bit. Try it with people. See how they respond differently if you simply identify your real emotions, not the idea or the concept, but the emotion behind it. Stay with the basic ones if it confuses you. Happy, good, sad, etc. Nonviolent communication does some excellent work on this. So the mutual agreement and encouragement of expression of feelings has got to be fundamental to a relationship, and you as a woman who tend to be close to your feelings want to be able to create the safe ground for the guy to be able to express his, and just say, I want to hear it, I want to know it, I love you, and I want you to feel completely safe to tell me at any given moment what you're feeling. And when he says some ideal word, like, oh, I'm feeling like you're picking on me. Say, no, what does it feel like to be picked on? What's the emotion? Rather than go, oh, I'm not picking on you. I'm inviting you to have an experience with me. So say, what's the feeling under that? What is it? Well, is it closer to fear? Is it closer to anger? Is it a combination of both? Is it something completely different? Say, oh, I feel this. Help him. Make it safe. And then if he says it, say, wow, man, that's great. Good to know that about you, to see in this place. Create a different ground than what the expectation is that if I do anything other than shout at you or manipulate you, I'm going to be in a very vulnerable place, and you might challenge who I am as a man. You had a question.
I have 2 questions that are related. They both came up with a very short relationship a few years ago. One was that I didn't know how to be with his anger. So let's say if he would tell me, this happened to me today, and I was really angry with her. I'm wondering if you could suggest ways of just allowing that feeling without trying to change, or what's the most appropriate when the reactions are very strong and very powerful.
What was her behavior?
She was his roommate, and she said something to him, I don't remember, but he was really, really angry about that. But his anger was very angry. Mm-hmm. So I had a reaction to his anger, to that expression.
And what's your relationship with this man?
I dated him. It was kind of in the early stages of dating, and I wasn't sure how to respond.
When did this happen?
A few years ago, where there was an interchange. We were in the car, and he was talking about something that happened to him in his day, and he was very angry about something that she said. Is it a healthy way of allowing that to be without me being frightened?
Right. That's a surprisingly common experience that women have with men. A lot of us guys have a lot of anger, and I know that because I've been one of those guys in my life. When we vent, we're venting, and to the inner child of the woman around, that can seem intimidating because women have so often been the targets of anger in their life, especially for men. And remember the matrix in which women lost their power, that hierarchy where the men gave up their power to the king, took the anger home, took it out on the wife, was physically able to intimidate the wife, and we still have an immense amount of physical abuse of women in this country, especially among people whose income levels don't allow them access to a lot of the healing methods that the rest of the culture has gotten some access to. And so this is a real issue in the culture. There's a really sense that male anger can go anywhere. There's an imprinting that to be careful about it, that women pick up in childhood as they're growing up. And you turn on TV and you see male violence in so many different shows. And it imprints in the women's mind that when I see a man in this state, anything can happen. And so it's not an unwarranted response. In a relationship where you're laying out agreements in front and speaking your realities, one of the things you might say is, it's important to me to be aware of just one thing. Male anger really scares me for reasons that have nothing to do with you. It really just triggers me into this place. So let's get an agreement about how to handle this when you get angered, so that you just don't go off. And so then I get triggers. I don't want to feel triggered. So establishing the framework of a relationship that everything can be on the table. You don't want to hide this fact from the fellow. You want him to know that going in, this is one of my issues, one of my boundary issues, one of the things that triggers me. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't do this behavior, but you should know that I'm going to get triggered. And so for you to say to him, this is something that really triggers me because anger scares me. So I just want you to understand that it would be helpful to me if you would just say, sweetheart, I got to vent about something, and don't take it personally, but I just want to get this off my chest. Or maybe you take some deep soothing breaths into yourself before you vent. Teach them to do some breathing in advance. But you make some sort of agreement when it comes up so that he'll understand it's okay. You want to vent. I can tolerate a certain amount of your venting. As long as you make it clear you're just venting and it's not me. And you say, let me do this. It's like me being around when you've seen somebody scream into a pillow. You're just detached and watching them. But you've been alerted.
Okay.
So you may even have that game. You say, okay, you want to scream into your pillow. Go scream into your pillow. Scream into the windshield.
And so if the amount of anger that's coming out feels very strong to me, and I am still vibrating from the intensity of the anger.
Don't be driving the car.
What?
Pull over.
Your suggestion is what? Is to just, work on my own breathing while he's
Absolutely.
He's doing his thing, even though I'm going into scared mode.
That's only one agreement. It's only one form of agreement. It actually would not be a bad form of agreement if you're highly reactive, because for you to be able to learn to be around that anger and deal with your trauma as it comes up is very useful. Remember, relationships are a great cauldron for healing yourself faster. And that doesn't mean you avoid this stuff. It means, what tools do I have to heal myself when I come up? And again, I have to refer to the basic tools in the mastery course. So yeah, you want to be in that place. You want to be in that place where you can use this incident to your best advantage. So learn to heal your reactive trigger. And you can make a different kind of agreement. The agreement can be, when you go into that mode and you feel you need to express it in that moment, I need you to let me know in advance so that even if we're driving, I can get out of the car and you can yell at the window or say what you want to say because I don't feel safe being around it, or I need you to manage it in a different way. With each guy and with each situation, it's going to be different. But you do want to have the agreements about this because it's a button. So that what's on the table is neither person is feeling attacked. A person's allowed to have their emotions, and you're learning to be around another person's feelings without taking it personally. And that's a practice, a practice, a practice. It doesn't happen overnight. So it's part of that conscientiality. I understand how volatile people can be, especially women in these issues. I had an experience myself where back in the years I was dating rather than just building friendships. I went out with a woman who was a therapist and therefore by necessity very sensitive. And she asked me about my work in media, and I got started talking about it, and I started talking about corporate media and my own, then still unprocessed, and I still got a little bit left, real anger and hatred for corporate media and its way it deceives the world. American media being, to me, one of the supreme forces that's holding back progress in the world, progress in human development, progress in social justice, progress economically, you name it, because it keeps the American public so absolutely miseducated in the news sense and doesn't show a lot of alternatives in the other cultural sense. So it's very limited in many ways in its perspectives, and its news is just terrible. In most cases, it's just awful. So historically had a lot of anger about this, which is why I got an inspiration to do something different, but anger at the power that it has over people. And so, I processed a fair amount of that out, but that was coming out in those moments. And it just came up. And so after we agreed to see each other, then I get a phone call and a message left on my machine. I really can't be around you. I can't be around a man who expresses that kind of anger like that. Even if it's not aimed at me, I just don't feel it, yeah? So I was spared having to be around a woman like that, but it's true about a lot of women. It's definitely true about a lot of women. Another question?
So my second question is, the same particular guy would also have anger directed at me. So if I said something that would trigger him, let's say we were having a phone conversation, he would ask me a question, and what I said triggered him, he would become angry in conversation and raise his voice. And then I would say, lower your voice, please. I don't like talking with people that raise their voice at me. And then he would say, no, you're stifling my emotional expression. He says, that's not healthy. And I said, well, I don't buy that. If you need to talk to me about something and I need to talk to you about something, it has to be in a calm way. This doesn't work for me. And he kept persisting that he needs to be allowed his emotional expression even when it was directed at me.
He needs to feel free to attack you with anger, basically. He wasn't just venting. He was venting with a target, and the target was you, right? So classic traumatized behavior, you have to expect some elements of it. There are men who are so visceral that they're not available. Even if they're making agreements on it, they're so easily triggered into attack modes that you need outside help for it. You got to have an agreement and set a boundary that unless you do some anger management courses and learn how to handle this, I can't continue with this relationship. I'm going to suspend the relationship because I see that on your own, you're not making the progress that's necessary to stay out of attack. You have a set of feelings. Those feelings replicate the anger you had suppressed in childhood. I get that. I understand where it comes from. Maybe you need to understand where it comes from. And you're targeting me in a way that puts us in a victim-perpetrator sense of relationship. You're feeling a victim, and you're going to perpetrate back on me, and now I feel a victim, and that's not healthy. I don't want to be in that relationship. So we need an agreement to handle this. We need agreement up front that how we're going to deal with your anger issues, how you're going to deal with it, and how I'm going to deal with it. And I'm going to ask you to respect my judgment about this. Sometimes it's too heavy to just talk it easily, but you can do the talking stick or the back-to-back process and have the other person hear, and you can make an arrangement by which if something comes up, instead of going to anger, you go to a process. You figure out a process that most works for you and say, oh, you got an issue, let's do our process on it. And you practice out that process. This is bringing sophisticated tools. But you as a woman who are triggered by anger want to make sure up front in your relationship, in your openness and your spokenness and your sharing of yourself, that the man understands that and knows it, so that not only was he being angry, being traumatic, but he's breaking an agreement. And the consequence of breaking agreements is a loss of trust. So, and a loss of trust means you're basing the relationship on, and he's basing the relationship on, and you're not calling him sufficiently into a place where the relationship is based on mutual caring, mutuality of caring, not what am I getting out of this? What's in it for me? Not I need you to make me feel a king or better or whatever, but what can I give here? The mutual sharing of that I talked about earlier of acknowledgement, praise, looking for the good things about the person in the course of a day. If you're really practicing that, that's going to set a different tone. It's going to help him. It's going to help you as well. It's going to help him when anger issues come up. Right? It's going to make him feel safer to own the anger without feeling he needs to attack you for it, rather than look at the deeper issues where he thinks your behavior is out of line. He feels you've wounded him. You know, you triggered me. You made me do this, rather than when you do that, I go into this triggered place. I got to deal with my trigger, and maybe you want to be conscious that I have this set of patterns that that's got to be healed and be my ally, coming together on how to heal this. Is that helpful? So 2 last points before we go into closing section here. You want to get to know your partner's traumatized self. You want to invite him to share about the things that have traumatized him in life. You want to know his patterns. In the basic course, there's a program for learning how to do people's patterns, but you want to learn his patterns, whether you do it through that method or any others. And you want to make it safe for him to be able to do this, so that not in a mommying way, but in the partner way. Like, if I know what your triggers are, what happened to you in childhood, what your triggers are, I don't have to take them personally, so I'm less likely to be reactive. So we're like, and I want you to know mine. I want you to tell you what my triggers are, as we've been talking about, and identify as many of them you can, and then say, okay, how do we work out our agreements around these? So one of the values of this is in him being allowed to own his traumatized self in front of you, and you being understanding and accepting about it and talking it through. It's not only a safety zone for the issue, but it's a safety zone for you not going to the reactivity where you're going to pull back and he's going to go into the pattern of fear of losing you and go into that pedestal place where he puts you on a pedestal and follows you around like a puppy dog, and et cetera, and you know you're not trusting this anymore. So by catching it early, by really dealing with the traumatized self up front and creating a safe space to talk about it, that's a primary way of getting to that later stage where you're on a pedestal and the guy's in such terror that you're dealing with a deeper issue now. And he's not owning his terror, and you better rush off to counseling and better get him into therapy. So in summing it up, one of the things you've heard for this section, there's the implicit and explicit underlying pattern is mutual responsibility. We each take responsibility in each area, so you have an agreement to take responsibility. Hendricks called 100% responsibility for what's coming up. If you're having a reaction, it's your reaction. You're responsible for that reaction. Same for him. But you do it in an atmosphere of no blame. And you consciously call the man into joining you in this place and saying, I want to be safe and you want to be safe. You work on no blame. Don't go into attacking the fellow, making him wrong because he's this or this. I got to change you. It's like, let's mutually create a playing field for each of our growths. And these are the elements. And learn the elements, get more sophisticated. Not just what I'm teaching, what lots of people teach. Don't stumble into a relationship with your high school tools, as I've said before, or your kindergarten tools, and think you're going to handle it when it comes up, because that's the circle down.
Coming up next, Jay reviews the classic patterns by which men thwart healthy relationships and outlines the best techniques for women to use to deal with these behavior patterns and attitudes.
So in summing up, I just want to go over some core patterns that we've already dealt with and what happens when they're in the extreme, and give you some ideas. Very short. And then we'll take some final questions and rush back to our relationships, or our gathering in of relationships. One or the other, or exploration of them. So one of the classic patterns is the avoider escaper. And technique that tends to work very effectively, if you're looking for processes that will work most effectively when that pattern is very strong, is to create a very established, we do this whenever this issue comes up, we call a halt, like sending the kid to the room, we call a timeout, and we go into one of these practices, or we do it every 3 days or once a week, whatever you establish, whatever agreements you have that seem organic. But you have an established no blame sharing session. You go right into an establishment, or you use it during the course of the week. I've described a couple of them where you're listening and you're empathically replying. And again, you can refer to the books. That's a valuable tool for that very strong pattern. If you're dealing with a fighter arguer, as I mentioned before, you want to do the same. You want to have established procedures, because that's an out-of-control behavior, and calling people into established procedures on a regular basis allows you to break up the spontaneous flow of I'm going to be what I'm in, and settle down and have a period where the vibration is different and you're working on an issue from a different place. Therefore, you're building a different set of responses in your neural net. Piece by piece by piece. Patience is always important. And where the pattern is strong, it's incumbent on the woman to be really strong, not to be dependent here, but just say, I love you, I care about you, but I'm not going to be in this relationship anymore under these circumstances. There's a requisite here that you learn to manage this. And the blessing is you can. It's out there. It's not no shame on you. You're fabulous. I want to see your wonderful qualities dominant, not your trauma taking you out of your happiness because you think something's triggered you. And so reactive, we can't work it through to a place that we're in good spirits again. So there's got to be a very strong stance on anger management where the other techniques are not working, and it's clearly a highly reactive man going into the state. So a controller, if you're dealing with a controller, you want to establish very strict agreements on areas in which he can be in charge. And you want to encourage him to do therapy, and you may want to do some couples therapy, at least a few sessions to learn. If you're not developing good patterns at home, go do a few sessions with somebody who can teach you good interactive patterns. But very strict agreements are necessary here when somebody's a controller. Strict agreements about, okay, you want to be in charge, you can be in charge of this part of life, but in this part of life, nothing gets done without mutuality. You don't spend a dime, I don't spend a dime, unless we separate our money. I know a couple where the guy was such a controller, and he wouldn't have the wife do anything at all about the money. They had millions of dollars. He made a series of absolute bad investments. He hid some of them, most of them from her. She snuck around and found them out of him, and she would say, those are terrible investments. We're going to lose all our money. You are crazy. You got spun around by this guy and that guy. You should not be allowed to be handling our money. And he says, no, I'm in control of our money. And that's the way it's going to be. I earned most of it, and therefore I'm in control of it. And he blew millions. And he blew his wife for many years. She went away for many years. Then he got a little better, so she came back. She did some healing work on himself. Controlling issues for real controllers are very serious, and they need to be taken seriously. And the only way to deal with it is spoken agreements. And if the guy is in resistance, you want to control something, control being in charge of mowing the lawn and the house. You're in control of that. Exercise that there. But when it's really a terrible pattern, it's got to be pointed out. And if it can't be healed just alone within the things you're learning as you learn about how to do a conscious relationship, then outside help is called for. Did you have a question, by the way?
What if you're in relationship with a controller, but it's not like you're in a marriage or even a very serious relationship, but you're in a relatingness with this person, and it's not like you can separate, and you don't even live together, so you can't separate duties around the house. Where can they control in that? I have a question about it, because it seems like if we still give them an area to control, that they're still controlling, and they're not learning to not be in control.
Well, the idea of giving him an area to control is that you're making it very obvious to the person that this is disorder, so go play in this field. And while he's playing that field, he's going to be thinking, oh, this is me being my controlling self, and maybe I open up to me be more receptive. Controllers are people who fear being in receptivity. They fear that you're going to make them wrong, that something's going to explode on them. It's a highly phobic, fear-based behavior pattern. attacking them as being controllers is not going to help. So when you've got a controller in any aspect of your life, you want to make the place to be able to discuss that the impact of their behavior on yourself in a way that doesn't scare them. So the languaging and nonviolent communications will help a lot. So you don't take that opportunity and have it blow up on you. And it's important you take that opportunity. You have to have an agreement on this. You have to let the person know you're affected by this. It's an issue for you. Here's how you feel it. This is how you experience it. And that you have a need for the person to be receptive to your ideas and thoughts and feelings and to respond to you. And if the person can't, with gentle nudging, you catch them in the moment, which is important. If you haven't had the conversation, or even after the conversations, if you haven't been doing something like nonviolent communication, every time they bring that up, stop them, say, oh, wait a minute, I hear you just said this, I hear you say this, and you're feeling this, and I'm feeling this about that. I'm feeling this, and my need in this situation is this, and I have this request to you. That puts it back on them so fast that they can't, because they're dealing with your emotion, they're dealing with you. So you want to be practicing something like that in the moment. And you also want to, as seems organically possible, arrange for a larger agreement and understanding that you're very sensitive to this. Let the person know it. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and in the areas where they could control if you're not in...
If the person's not that day in in your life, and so in day in your life, you're trying to make everything a game and a playful healing experience and a learning venture. So you agree you can go control the lawn stuff, you make it a game, that kind of stuff. You work on it. You may not have the grounding in that relationship, or time in that relationship, so you have to decide whether you even enter that field. Part-time relationships may not call for it. So, moving on, jealousy. Jealousy is a real difficult issue, especially when we men get wrapped up, but when any of us get wrapped up in it. It's really, really hard issue. It's an emotional fear of loss. It's a sense that my identity is going to get smashed. Jealousy is based on the fear that I'm going to get smashed. I'm not enough. I'm going to have to look at myself and my whole sense of my idealized self as being this person in the world, this king, or whatever I envision myself as not enough. And I'm going to lose some, on an emotional basis, whatever connection I might have emotionally to somebody. So there's an image level and going on here, an idealized self level going on here, and an inner issue here. So real serious jealousy almost always calls for outside intervention, some form of therapy for the person, because they may need help dealing with, we're talking about extravagant jealousy, really phobic jealousy.
Attacks you?
Like when somebody attacks you, right? That person needs help, outside help, but within the terms of the relationship, within the grounding of the relationship, or it's so obvious it may need that stage. Find out from the person, do you tend to be jealous? And what are your triggers in jealousy? If I talk to another guy, is it that easy that you get jealous? Do you get jealous only if I don't come home late? What are your boundaries on this? And again, if you're doing mutual approving things, then that helps bring down the sense of fear and that you might be escaping. And obviously, if you've made a co-committed relationship and it's based on a healthy relationship already, if you're starting one out on basis of friendship and allyship, that's going to bring down the issue. I know many of you, if not most of you, may be in relationships already that you haven't set this grounding and need to start building it. There's one technique called the gremlin technique that we talk about in the Life Mastery Basics class. In the gremlin technique, the person recognizes that this is a fear voice inside themselves, and they draw a picture of that as if it was a little enemy, a little gnome inside them, a gremlin. And you draw that picture, and he writes down the fear statement, and he puts it up on a wall where you can both look at it, so you can both objectify and say, that's not me, that's the voice of my fear. It's not really me. It may not be real, but it's just a fear voice. And you give it a funny name. So you're giving yourself distance from it, and you're observing it. That's something you might want to explore in dealing with jealousy. But overall, it's got to be on the table, and it's got to be handled as a trauma. And if you can handle it with the tools you learn here or from any of the books, it needs outside intervention. He's going to need some help. Therapists who are specialists in phobic reactions, it's a phobic reaction. So it's therapists who specialize in training people in phobic reactions can use that. The other thing that can be helpful are the emotional management techniques that are available in the mastery class, or you can Google for them. So I'll name 3 of them we mentioned, and you can Google for them and see if you want to dive directly in. One is called Heart Math Solution, the Heart Math Institute. Another is called the Sedona Institute's work, and the other is simply called Soma breathing, gentle breathing into the part of the body that's feeling the anxiety most, with taking the mind off the story and putting it on the body. Well, what if you're dealing with a manipulator? A manipulator calls for absolute spoken contracts. You need spoken contracts about everything. And potentially the person, if he's really a heavy manipulator, or if you're one, you need to work things out in therapy. But a manipulator, if you feel somebody's got strong tendencies towards being manipulative, you want to have very strong contracts to which you hold him, in which he understands that to honor you, to care about you, to show caring for you, to be in the relation in the first place means honoring the contract so that he's learning to be straightforward. You need contracts about him speaking his truth in the moment, contracts about him allowing you space to respond, him not setting up false stories in any way. Identify the major ways he tends to manipulate and put him in spoken contracts. Again, this comes under the bigger label that you want to have this larger agreement that you're going to work through your issues and you're going to develop skills to work through them. He's got to be right. He's got to win. When that's a strong thing, you want to do those no blame sharing sessions. They're very powerful for that because the fellow's got to hear. The exercise is in empathic listening, giving back, receiving, receiving, receiving. Controllers and manipulators and winners need to be invited every way possible into trusting and receiving. And one way to receive practice is to just hear and receive and give back. Receive, express, share back what you just heard. Receive, share back what you just heard. Take some out of that need to change it, fix it, own it, be right about something, okay? And finally, victim. If you're with a guy who's always playing the victim, you did this to me, and this happened, and this, and the world sucks, and I can't get my shit together here, and is down on himself a lot. And you want to stay with this person, and then you're going to have to do a lot of no-blame sessions with him about his behavior so he can hear your responses to it and feel both safe and take it in. And it's an essential therapy thing. This guy's going to need some therapy as a contract in your relationship if he's massively doing victim and not working it. It's playing that victim so strongly is an obsessive fear pattern. And if the tools in the relationship that you're developing aren't working, and you want to stay with him, or you choose to stay with him only if he's doing therapy. There's a process called green lighting, and you want to have a strong contract on green lighting. What is green lighting? I can't learn to play tennis. I hate tennis. I'm a guy, my arm doesn't work right. So that's the red light. I'm going to give myself the great adventure of learning to play tennis and having some wonderful new therapy on my arm so it moves more smoothly, and I'm going to have to make this a great adventure. You turn the things you're negative into a great adventure for yourself. It's a great mindset for, I'm going to green light, doing the work that Jay is teaching me, because I'm going to make it the most fun adventure in my life rather than have to do this. So encourage the victim person to get into a green lighting mindset. So the moment he says, I can't do this, and you do this, and you're a victim of this, I'm a victim of you. Have him green light. It's going to be a great adventure for me, darling, to be open to your wonderful female input rather than to be in blame on you. Okay? So when we talk about taking 100% responsibility and the woman being aware, the women's patterns, your own patterns, is something you need to be very aware of. And your own needs and desires is something you need to be forceful about owning and presenting in this relationship when you're dealing with men. You don't want to obscure them. So you have a profound need to be related to and to feel empowered, because women have come out of less empowered situations historically. And everybody wants to feel empowered. You want to feel equal and not either the caretaker for, which is your tendency, the guy, or the victim of the guy, but you want to be related to. And that has to be something you own and set forward clearly and not come to as wait until you're having emotional reactions and he's not paying attention, and you're freaking out on him and criticizing him, I'm going to change you. It's got to be a basics of when you enter a relationship, of how you even evaluate the guy, how he treats you. And if you're already in a relationship and this isn't happening, it's incumbent upon you to own that this is what you want and that it's not wrong, and that the male pattern of hiding, the idea we don't have the same interests, either don't be together at all or learn to hold your own power and take responsibility for that. You have a need to be heard like all human beings do. So you want contracts about that and just an agreement. And you want to be very aware of your responsibility from identifying, owning, and managing your own historical traumatized patterns. I'm just going to mention them. These tend to be, again, none of this is universal. This just tends to be some of the more frequently used behavior patterns that women go into from their historic positions. One is you have a false desire for king. You think if I have the right king, I'll be protected. So you try to build up the guy as your king, or you get disappointed if he's not the king. But you want to be, there's something about you that wants to be in a submissive role. So because in that sense, you have your little area of responsibility, and you don't have to really cultivate your whole dream for life and things like that. So there's also a false desire for king. In young women, it's like going after the hot, charismatic guy who's going to make your life so rich, etc. The groupie syndrome. But the groupie syndrome is a subtle thing that filters through this male-female dominance game that's very deeply imprinted in us. It's something you want to look to spot in yourself and take responsibility for and look to heal, where you're giving up your power of equality. There are different roles men play and women play, but it doesn't mean king over. Other issues are the trustworthiness of the male because of our behavior patterns, your sense of the men are not trustworthy, your own reactiveness, however you might react to this. You're very guarded, you're very controlling yourself, you go to manipulation, whatever it is. Look at the way you're dealing with any issues you might have about men being trustworthy in your behavior pattern. It's not forthright, setting clear ground, creating the ground for your own self-expressions, and going into fight or flight around that yourself. Then you've got a responsibility for your behavior, your reactiveness. Women can very easily flip to victim. That's another fight or flight pattern. I'm the victim. You're a victim perpetrator. You're not owning your own power. He's not saluting your idealized self rather than you learning to express your real self. Many women have remnants of the historical thing where women had to both manipulate and use men because they were chattel and they had to be very careful about if they're going to eat the next day and not be on the streets or stoned to death with rocks. Be very aware of guarding themselves against that. And there's remnants of that that's passed down in the cultural matrix. And there's tendencies of women to say, okay, you're the power, you're the king, you're the breadwinner. Well, I'll just use you to make my advance rather than take responsibility for their own lives and own that that's rarely is a path to success and certainly not a path to relatingness. So women tend to have emotional outbursts and depression around their frustrations and their pains. Depression is rife in the culture for women because of their feelings they can't be fully expressive of their emotions. They're around the man and hasn't created a space for that. You need to work on that issue. Another tendency of women is to become overprotective of the male, over-allowing for the male, rather than negotiate your clear boundaries and agreements. And in a safe way, without non-judgmental way, call him to show up in the way you'd like. There's a strong tendency in many women who get very critical of the guy because you've suppressed your anger about it. And it's not ladylike to really show your anger. Girls aren't really allowed to do it. You're a bitch, you're a cunt, you're this or that, and she sneaks out that way. Taking responsibility for that reactive pattern, using the tools you're learning to heal that, creating the space in the relationship to express your feelings. That's important. And finally, passive-aggressive. Men are not the only ones in the world that get passive-aggressive. Women often get passive-aggressive. And, you'll hold back on something. You'll just take it, and then you'll burst out, get aggressive about something. Fear-based behavior, okay? Identify it, own it, learn what you need to do. Use the relationship to create the space for you to heal that, okay? Okay, questions?
My question is about if both people, the man and the woman, are traumatized, one may have done therapy, maybe the man, and they come into the relationship is it doomed to failure if both of them don't work on it?
It's doomed to failure. It's the failure of being out of there, and then there's the failure, the worst failure, staying in there and just trotting on with the same patterns all day long, and then you get to your deathbed and say, oh my God, what did I do?
My next question is about women being able to get a man to communicate when he doesn't feel like communicating. And my experience was with my husband, I would come home and he would just be doing his thing, and he would say a few perfunctory words to me. And this is after 10 years of marriage, and then he would just go about his business. And so that was my experience, and ultimately I ended up being separated from him.
Well, that was the right move, because he was not stepping up to meet you in relating this. You weren't in relationship. You were living in the same house with an unspoken contract that just to tolerate it as much as best as you can. That was your unspoken contract. Figure out what you could do when you could no longer tolerate it.
I always felt like I was judged all the time.
Right, and you probably were being judged all the time, because that's where the critical mind goes to, the traumatized self. Or we come into the game, we think it's all about us, and the moment we don't feel like our idealized selves are being saluted in the relationship and being, pedestaled and given us freedom, not just men, but women as well, we go into criticism and judgment. That's the pattern of the human defense system. You never had an agreement with him up front to use the relationship as consciously. But the point you bring up about men, one of the things that can be helpful is understanding where he's coming from, understanding the pressures the male is under. He's had a hard day at the office. He probably doesn't like his work that much, et cetera. He needs zone-out time. He wants to escape into the TV or not deal. He needs some downtime from that. He doesn't meditate, doesn't know how to plan to take his solitude, take a long walk for an hour, go to the gym, work it out, and come back, work himself through that. That takes planning in marriage, in a relationship. What are the elements we need to nurture ourselves so we're in balance? And a conscious relationship will look at how to be in balance, how each person for themselves are going to stay in balance in their life, so two balanced people are meeting them. So that's the larger context. And the specific context was when a guy goes there. The thing to say is see if you can find a playful way to say, instead of escaping into the TV, what kind of dialogue could we be having that would feel like an escape to you? And be creative about that.
Could it possibly be, if someone is not escaping to a TV, they're escaping into, they love their work, they come home and they obsess about what happened at their work all day, and
the
they're
workaholics.
planning for their work for the next day, and aside from getting cleaned up and having a little bit of food, that's basically their existence. Maybe they might take a walk, or they might do some exercise or something, but basically they have a pattern and they stay. And I've noticed with a lot of my friends as well as myself that there's certain men that just get into like a rote type of a pattern. They wake up, they have the same breakfast, they do patterns.
Right, we do patterns. We stay within our safety zone because we have so little tools historically, and because that king wound is very profound. We're so outside our true power that whatever comfort zones we find, we get patterned into, and we want to stay there. Remember, we don't have as many pathways across. That 6-year remark that Michael Meade made. It takes us 6 years, right? We're slower. So we have to sort of be gently led by women who are compassionate and understanding, and make it safe for us to open up. Most of what I'm talking about has to deal with women learning how to hold a space and consciously saying, I'm going to hold a space that's not critical and judgmental of the fellow, but where he feels safe enough to move along, and knowing that the qualities you want from us, we actually possess, and understanding the trauma we're in, the fear-based behavior, how we avoid things because we've got this core fear because we don't feel safe, and we don't feel safe and even know how to relate enough, so he doesn't feel safe. So we're not doing this to attack you, even though sometimes we do. We're doing this because we don't know any better. We need allies. We need to open up to having allies. The woman who's very patient and allows for us to be allies, is understanding and was willing to hold the space and let us make clear progress, but maybe somewhat slow progress, is immensely helpful in any relationship because the woman more likely has the capacity to do that than the male. I want to tell a story about this because it's good. And then I'm going to come back to answer the question about workaholic patterns because I know that one real well for myself. There's this lovely piece in the New York Times Magazine about a year ago that one of my clients sent me. It was about a woman whose husband came home one day. She's a writer and very bright, and they've been married and they had 2 kids, 17 years or something like that. And he hit a sort of midlife crisis. He comes home one day and announces to her that I have no interest in you anymore, and I'm leaving. And she went, and rather than panic, she went into this place of saying, she went and meditated on it. She said, is this true? Could we have had this connectiveness that he could walk away from so suddenly? Could everything have been an illusion? And she said, no, it wasn't. We really do love each other. We really have had this mutual caring for each other, and we really have been a good couple. So something else must have been triggered in him that sent him into this reaction, something deep in his trauma pattern. And she thought about what it might have been, and she came up with some conclusions that it had to do with a fear from his family issues, if I remember correctly, fear of aging and things like that, not uncommon. And so what she made a decision to do was just hold space, not to react. So her response to him when she pulled together is, I understand. It's perfectly okay. I understand. It hurts me. I really feel bad. I love you deeply. I don't agree that the decision is really going to serve you in the end. And if that's your decision, there's nothing I can do but accept it. And you're welcome to stay here while you work it out. And I'm not going to give you a hard time about it. I'm just going to be here. And she just went about her life managing her own fears and negativity. And she created things to do with the kids over the summer and activities. And she'd just keep with him and say, you invite him to come along and come do this. And he would turn her down. And she noticed day by day by day, he wasn't leaving. He just stayed around and he kept saying, I'm getting my... And she didn't challenge him about it. She just said, I accept it. They stopped sleeping, moved into another bedroom or something like that. And that was it. And she just held the space without any attack on him at all, and just loving invitations to join. And she talks about how difficult it was for her to manage this, but she felt, or her knowing self said, this is truth. I'm not going to give authority to my traumatized self. And I wouldn't go freak out and have this, and I sure want to, but I'm not going to give it authority. So she just held the space. And a few months went by, and one day he comes home. And he does something, I think it was mowing the lawn or something he'd been neglecting, and he just does this. And then he comes into the house and says, I've changed my mind, I'm staying. I realized I was just going through some stuff and I needed to work out, and I'm sorry if it made difficulty for you, but I really do want to be here, and I really do belong here, and I really care about you. So that was the story. So what she was able to do from her knowingness and wisdom is help a traumatized male find his own truth by not increasing his likely reactive pattern. She did not enable him. She did not codepend with him. She did not try to take care of him. She did not try to fix a thing. She just held the space. She created a space that said, this is what's here. This is what I invite you to. And, as long as you're not acting out in any kind of way and coming home and trashing me and being mean, you're accepted here. So the lesson is that call the man, be patient, and hold the space, and use your nonviolent communication skills, ward skills, to deal with what you know of as a traumatized pattern of the male, because when we do show up, you know how wonderful we can be. When we're really present, and we're not pulling back out of our fear. It's only fear. We're not really out to make your lives miserable. We're only dealing with a product of being miseducated so badly about who we really are. We are the product of a culture that has trained us to deny ourselves. And it's not that we're here to be your attackers, make your lives miserable. It's that we are suffering and we are hurting and we are confused and swimming around inside ourselves, and need all the allies we can get who are understanding. So understanding will take you further than attack. They're very real world issues, the trauma men and women bring into relationship. I've done a good deal of men's group work with men. We're encouraged to really reveal ourselves. And you would not believe the kind of pain men are in over father issues, mother issues, denial issues, false senses of who they have to be in the world. And when a guy really gets to it, the heaviest weeping, sobbing I've ever seen in my life has been from men, not women. The most heartbreaking sense of dislocation from self I've seen with men. And it's a little harder for us because it's also harder for us to come out of it. Biologically, it's a little harder. And that whole image fixture that we're supposed to be strong and instead, and misplacing what strong is as control over, power over, rather than the strength of being just who we were created as, just being ourselves. Yeah.
My next to last question is about children from parents that were in World War II and children from parents that were in Vietnam, and what, especially the males, of how they relate to going through their trauma with their family, and how then they have the relationships with the women. And mostly if the men have been severely abused by their father because their father was in war and saw what he saw during the war. You know, so I've noticed this with the World War II children and the Vietnam children that are coming up now. So, and then the next part is, if they've had alcohol and drug problems stemming from that parental upbringing from the war, and they become sober, clean, but they've never done any therapy, and they believe that therapy is not helpful. And then the relationships they have with women and how the women deal with the traumatized man from that place of, yes, he's not drinking and he's not doing drugs, and but he's still abusive in his mannerisms.
Well, the issue of male violence and proximity to violence is universal. So let me say this, as much violence in the world as there is, violence is unnatural to the human spirit. It is unnatural to the human spirit. It is always, always coming from the traumatized self, from the sense of my entitlement over your entitlement. Why do people rebel, fighting off repression? Why do they try to control others? Because they want more than the others. So violence has played itself out through human history, and it's always traumatizing. And so men who've gone off to war, and now women who've gone off to war, come home, and the highest suicide rate in the country. We've got 1,000 guys who've been in Afghanistan have off themselves. Severe problems of emotional readjustments. When you're murdering another person, even in defense, and doing it from a traumatized action, you're clearly not in your knowing, equal, organized self, so you really alienated yourself. And the society is trying to stay more in that balance than you, and you've gone off and been the warrior. So this is very difficult, and it plays out through, it's the historical guy coming home. Remember the women who said, Lysistrata, no more sexing until you guys get your acts together, if you want me. Because they couldn't stand the volatility, the defensive, aggressive postures of warriorhood, false woodhood, as I conquer this, the conquering mindset. So it's just been a historic issue. And the very short answer to that question is, this is simply an exaggeration of trauma pattern, and everything we've been learning in this course and everything that I've taught in Life Mastery Basics completely applies, and almost always you need some outside intervention. You're going to need outside counseling for this, and an agreement that outside counseling would place in the safety zone, which is, this is only trauma. You're not wrong, you're not a bad person, you're not an evil person. You simply have trauma that's in the way of the beautiful self you are, and all you have to do is heal the trauma, use some techniques, heal the trauma. It's not even therapy, it's just learn techniques to heal the trauma and let your real self come forward. That's the stance. I need to say something quickly about workaholic patterns. Workaholic patterns is a major avoidance pattern. You get obsessive and fear, and the idealized self is wrapped into work, and you take on too much, and it becomes kind of pleasurable escape sometimes, or sometimes just a burdensome escape, but you're caught in that pattern. So it's basically an avoidance pattern and needs to be dealt with as an avoidance pattern, as I discussed earlier. Put on the table, dealt with from that point of view. And if the man's not going to show up, then you've got to make a decision about whether you want to be with this man. If all the other tools we're talking about don't bring him to say, I'm going to own that, and this relationship is not just be about me, it's going to be about us and my caringness for you and time we spent together, not just a convenience for me, then if you get him to that agreement, then you have hope. If he's not going to agree, that you're not in a relationship, you're in some situation. So you have to decide if you want to be in a situation rather than be in a relationship. Last final questions for this course.
Can you speak to men who, because they're so unfamiliar with having a nurturing, empowered, egalitarian sort of relationship, that they actually might push away one that could have that potential in favor of something that's more of a clash, more conflict, because it's just what they're used to, or they think they need that to grow instead of growing within a nurturing environment of a relationship?
The easy comment is, do you love being in conflict? Are you a natural debater, you know? Jews love to fight with each other, you know, we do that a lot. We like our debates. So you got to have the pleasure in it. If it's not a pleasure for you, then you're probably just in the wrong situation, chasing the wrong guy. He's not ready to give that up so easily because that's his safety zone. He knows he gets his little wins and he gets his little losses, but he comes back again. And it's like life becomes argument. I am, therefore I argue. So it's a pattern. It's a clear, aggressive pattern that's also escapist in a way, because it means you don't show up for more subtle experiences. And unless the guy says, I'm aware this is a pattern of mine, and I really would like to try something different and be available, and if you want to be open to be my guide to that, and we'll learn it step by step together. The guy's not in that place, and you don't like it, you don't even want to enter the relationship. Why be there? Except take a look at what's keeping you there. Mm-hmm. What fear-based patterns you're acting on that says, I'll take less, or I need this so badly, rather than say, what's unhealed in me that I'm trying to look at who in the family may have had that kind of pattern that you're still trying to fix in some way. So I'm Jay Levin, and this is the second class on what women need to know about men. I encourage you to take your time and patience with this work, as I've given you a lot. Use what you can, take it step by step. Don't try to do it all at once. Don't overwhelm yourself. Do the easy stuff first, what's doable, so you build confidence and you build new networks, and then figure out the next step you want to take. I wish you the best in your relationships.
If you are interested in an appointment with Jay, you can email him at jlevincoaching@gmail.com or contact him directly at jlevin.com. The following are testimonials from students who completed Jay Levin's course on Life Mastery Basics.
Hi, my name is Mike, and I'm a cameraman, and I am sitting here in front of you because on my first day coming in to film Jay, I was very surprised to be a part of what was happening. I was not expecting the shoot that I had walked in on. And after filming Jay for a day, I realized that what he was talking about had been something that I had maybe been searching for a long time, and was very surprised and felt very excited that what I had walked in on and became a part of was something that I would offer up to my family and friends and even my peers. I'm 28 years old, and the first thought that came to my mind was how my buddies could use this skill set to improve and better their own lives. So as I was thinking, standing behind the camera, I spoke up to Jay and felt, I was so excited about what he was talking about that he decided to put me in front to give a small testimonial, because I really felt it was necessary to let the audience know how important and groundbreaking these life skills are. Just sit back for a moment and think about your own life and your relationships. And I think what Jay is touching upon is very much the essence of community and family and friendship, and I would highly recommend it to anyone.
One of the things about this course is that it's called Basics of Life Mastery, and I think one of the things that course provides is giving practical tools that can be applied in real life situations so that we can move out of sort of the stance self, move out of the traumatized self, and really make deliberate progress and concrete progress. So I think the tools are one of the most important things, that we're actually learning skills, sets to work with another human being, to actually live and come from a very creative way and fun way of living in life. It's not like a chore. It really makes it more of this engaged way of being in the world. I think the course is extremely valuable no matter whether someone feels extremely skilled in this kind of work. I think it's still, there's always something to be learned, because the moment we think that we've mastered it, we stop learning, we stop growing, and there's always, I think, room to grow. I would say nonviolent communication and also the class on finances and relationships, those are probably the most valuable for me. And learning how to just be with a human being more on a really authentic, open, sharing level where it's very, very connected. No hiding, no gaming, really one person coming to another from the soul level.
Yes, I am feeling some shifts, more shifts of connection with people, family members. I've noticed myself be a bit more empathic than usual in my usual stance. So I've done a little bit less of that in the last couple of days. I'm a bit more empathic, more communicating. And also I'm noticing a lot more natural bubbling of joy that's coming forward. Well, I found the course meaningful personally, first of all, in the explanation of how we as humans develop our trauma self and how we act from this trauma self. I found that I have a deeper understanding of how I'm acting and reacting, so I find that tremendously valuable. Another thing that's been clearer is how I am in relationships in terms of codependency, i.e., am I telling the truth and am I backing myself up and holding my own when I'm in relations with people? So that's coming up for heightened awareness. Another thing that's coming up from the course is the understanding that the frustration I was feeling in the past few months is me having a very profound need to express myself in many areas that I haven't been very internal.
The things that I've learned in this course that are already affecting my life are as follows. The value of the relationship, the value of the non-violent communication, honoring myself more and realizing that I don't have to commit a codependent dance with people, that just reaffirming things that I already knew and anchoring in, hopefully, at least the foundation for nonviolent communication so I don't get into, aggressive arguments with people anymore. I'd like to do a couple of the courses again, a couple of the sessions again, like relationships and the nonviolent again, and also the self-nurturing. I'd like to do that. I would say whether you've done a lot of work on yourself or whether you've done almost no work on yourself, this is a good point to stop and take a look at how you relate to yourself, how you relate to others, how you walk through your day-to-day life, whether you go with blinders on or whether you have a full 360-degree view. I would say that this is a key mastery to starting that journey and continuing forward so you can be your full potential. I would say that that's a key point. And if you don't want to, no one's going to hold anything up to you and push you. You have to take the first step yourself.
The following are testimonials from 2 men students who completed Jay's 2-class course on what men need to know about women, which is available on this website. Also available are the 2 relationship classes from Jay's Life Mastery Basics course, which are helpful and important complements to the women's course.
Experiencing this class on learning more about women, I'm seeing more of myself as well as I learn more about women, is I have more clarity in the aspect of patterns that I've developed, and I'm very fortunate that I've been working on those already. But this class has outlined other aspects that I hadn't quite focused on as clearly as this makes me do. And it makes me very excited because I'm currently in a relationship that's intimate, but I also consider my friends, my female friends, as family. And that's an intimate relationship to me right there. So this is all important, and I will carry this in through the rest of my days.
So sitting through the What Men Need to Know About Women class was very interesting for me. I've never done anything like this before, therapy or group classes, nothing like this. So it seemed like a lot was coming at me, like I was getting bombarded with all these subconscious things that I was aware of, but never actually expressed with other people. I feel like everyone's aware of these things, but to talk about it really brings it out. And I learned a little more about myself, and not being in a relationship right now, I think it gave me a good roadmap for the next one that might come up.